So unsurprisingly, residents of the city of New York, specifically outer borough residents that obviously cannot afford to live in the congestion zone, the new millionaire's playground in the city of New York, are discovering day by day that the congestion pricing scam is just that, a scam. Because remember, we are told that the issue of congestion is ultra serious, that we need to stop traffic at all costs, and of course that this is going to be big funding for the MTA, which of course is one of the most corrupt agencies in the entire country, and if you give them more money, you might actually be a ridiculous, out-of-touch psychopath. But one of the instances that is really making residents of Queens angry is the fact that the 59th Street Bridge is located on 59th Street, and the congestion pricing zone is actually set up to start at 60th Street. So if you are on the 59th Street Bridge, you know, the entranceway to it, you will be told the full $9 even if you're in this congestion zone for only a minute. And obviously this was done on purpose. This was done to extract money from outer borough residents on what used to be one of the few toll-free bridges in the city of New York, and it's disgusting in every possible way. But don't worry, the anti-car Nazis, the people who hate your personal vehicles and want to ruin your life, are celebrating it because now they get to bike freely all below 60th Street. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to remind you that friend of the channel, Devin Tracy, his parents lost their family home that they've owned since the 70s in the California wildfires, and he's currently raising money via GoFundMe in order to support them through this troubled time. This will be linked in the description of the video if you choose to donate, and if you don't want to, or you can't, or you don't like Devin, I totally understand, but I'm just trying to help a friend.
An outcry tonight from some drivers about congestion pricing. Drivers who have been using the 59th Street Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge.
So right off the top, I just want to say, even though the local newsman has to call it by all these different various names, the true name of the 59th Street Bridge is in fact the 59th Street Bridge. Any other name that is given to it is done by somebody who does not live in the city of New York, who isn't a real New Yorker, and I just wanted to make that 100% clear.
They say there is no way to get from Manhattan to Queens without paying that $9 fee, even though they have no intention of going into the congestion pricing zone.
So the local news guy lays out this issue pretty succinctly. Again, if you go into the zone just to get on what is supposed to be a toll-free bridge, you get charged the full congestion pricing fee, despite the fact that, again, you are not actually in the congestion zone for any serious amount of time. However, he asked whether or not this is an easily solvable issue just by moving the zone down one block so people can just exit through this bridge, or it's something that is, you know, maybe more difficult. But in reality, this is something that is in fact intentional.
So why is this happening? A little and solvable issue, or a very big problem?
Again, this is fueled by an anti-car ideology that is prominent amongst the left and amongst the liberal elites. All of those people that were celebrating the night of the unveiling of the toll sign are ridiculous people, but they're also extraordinarily wealthy people who don't want the riffraff driving on the streets of Manhattan because they want a walkable paradise. They want a bike zone, and I'm not joking about this. There was actually a post by a multimillionaire who describes himself as one of the biggest bankrollers of congestion pricing when he was talking about how he was biking so freely without the oppressive violence of people in vehicles in the city. Now, of course, this guy was biking in very cold conditions because he's one of these anti-car psychopaths, and when you look at the streets of New York, one of the things that you'll realize is that traffic is depressed extraordinarily. But again, this is all by design. The envirotards and the anti-car Nazis are getting what they want.
In this new congestion pricing era, Andrew Joseph, who just moved to Long Island City, probably won't be driving across the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge.
I'm not going to be congesting Manhattan with my car anymore.
But notably, if you are heading into Manhattan and planning to go uptown, you can stay on the upper level of the Ed Koch and avoid the toll. However, when you go back to Queens, there is no avoiding it, whether you're on the upper level or the lower level, because the road takes you below 60th Street before you start heading across the bridge. This man driving south on 2nd Avenue just paid $9 to enter the congestion zone for less than a minute.
Definitely not good. I'm not happy.
Now right here you see the obvious plight of the drivers, and to be clear, even though there are crossings like the RFK Bridge into Queens that are north of this location, the RFK Bridge is also tolled at a similar rate to the congestion zone. So there's no real way for you to get out of the borough of Manhattan and into Queens without actually paying this toll or some other toll that is similar in value. And I want to emphasize this, that this is in fact intentional. The traffic is not necessarily bottlenecking up around 60th Street on the borough of Manhattan. This is more about downtown Manhattan, the financial area, but the anti-car people wanted to cut off any avenue of escape for a bunch of different people so that they could just reduce the number of cars total by, again, disincentivizing driving because they are ideologically opposed to driving. Now, by the way, as predicted in my previous video, all of these different advocates for congestion pricing have unmasked themselves, had said, you know what, I don't really care about money for the MTA or anything of the sort. What I actually care about is you and your dumb cars getting out of my way, because again, they want the riffraff, they want people to have their individual freedom restricted, and make no mistake about it, cars are individual freedom. And by the way, that same guy that I talked about, the millionaire who was the biggest funder of congestion pricing, he said it explicitly to the New York Post that he wants to limit severely, or he said very, very much limit private cars. That is the goal, an anti-car ideology. And even though this is obviously not going to lead to the funding as promised for the MTA, because you're essentially cutting off all the people that would drive in and pay the tolls at the various bridges and tunnels that would go to the MTA, you're just cutting off cars and spiting drivers just to spite them, and of course hurting all these different small businesses that rely on deliveries, because make no mistake about it, the delivery trucks get charged repeatedly throughout the day, despite the fact that individual passenger cars only have to pay it once per day.
But here's the thing, the MTA reminds drivers the toll is not contingent on how long you're in the Manhattan Central Business District, just if you're in it at all. In a statement, a spokesperson for the MTA said, quote, "The law passed 5 years ago that established the congestion relief zone set the boundary as Manhattan south of and including 60th Street, except for the FDR Drive and West Side Highway. The location of toll points aligns exactly."
So of course the MTA, the most corrupt agency in the city of New York and maybe the most corrupt agency nationwide, releases a statement saying, haha, in your face, you got to deal with it. It's not about how long you're actually causing congestion in the congestion zone. It's about whether or not you're below 60th. And yes, this is our sneaky way to put tolls on the East Side bridges that for the longest time never had tolls. You're just going to have to deal with it. Stupid drivers, stupid Queens residents. Why don't you make more money to live in the millionaire's paradise that is Manhattan, that's more walkable, in your stupid faces?
Still, some feel this toll point in particular impacts Queens residents unfairly.
They've been the most vocal people that have been against the congestion pricing, saying it just hurts them the most and hits them the most.
Probably not as fair as when you, because the congestion, you're trying to avoid the congestion in Manhattan, not going the other way. No, probably it's not fair, but yeah, such is life, right?
So I just want to point out the obvious, which is the people who drive, the people who have to drive in the city of New York, who have to drive in Manhattan, are pretty reasonable in comparison to the anti-car activists, to these people who want to limit your ability to own private cars, not just in New York City, but nationwide in comparison. Because here you have people who figured out, obviously, that this is a scheme. This is a scam. The whole point of congestion pricing is to reduce congestion in this congestion zone, but in reality, they have a specific setup in order to extract money from people that are leaving the zone, that may be coming from uptown and just want to go back to Queens, that shouldn't be impacting anything below 60th Street at all whatsoever, but they're like, you know what, like, it's completely unfair, it's totally a scam, but such is life in the big city. And in reality, this is what we're going to expect, this is what we're going to see throughout this process, because the MTA is not going to get anywhere near the funding that is promised through this, and already we're hearing murmurs about Governor Kathy Hochul raising the payroll mobility tax on the entire state of New York in order to fund the expected deficit that the MTA is experiencing. Because obviously, like I said, if you're reducing the incomes that they would get from all the various toll bridges into the congestion zone, that is going to offset the increase in revenue that you're going to charge to the much fewer cars that are in said congestion zone. In addition to that, obviously the small businesses that are going to have to pay higher higher costs for deliveries. And again, deliveries are charged repeatedly throughout the day for being in the zone, not just one time per day, unlike passenger cars. And then you're going to have reduced traffic because people aren't going to want to drive into the city unless they absolutely have to, or as often as they previously would for, going to restaurants or going to certain businesses in order to shop and whatnot. So it's going to end up being a boon to online shopping at the expense of the retailers, which is going to decimate the tax base.
And a reminder, drivers only get tolled once per day. So if you know you're going to be driving over the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge 2 times, you're either going to get hit on the way in or on the way out.
Now, of course, you have all the dopey progressives that you would expect that are in favor of this, as well as a bunch of different online accounts that seemingly sprung up overnight in order to advocate for this, which seems rather weird because when you talk to regular, ordinary, everyday people, the last thing they want is for them to have to pay a larger tax and for that tax to go to a corrupt agency like the MTA. Now, I talked about cost overruns and all the different things that cause the MTA problems with their finances in the city of New York. But I think it is very important for me to emphasize another issue, which is the fact that these subway stations are not really handicap accessible because only about 28% of these stations have elevators. And by the way, even some of the ones that have elevators, that can be a little bit deceptive, don't actually get you to all of the trains that are available in those particular stations. But one of the reasons why this is something that doesn't get fixed is because cost overruns for putting in elevators in these subway stations are completely out of control. I want you guys to think about any elevator or every elevator that you've ever been in your life. Then come up with a number on how much you think said elevator would cost, and then realize that the New York City MTA spends around $100 million to install elevators. Now, this is the final budget for a specific project, but when they pointed out that if this were a private company and it were inaccessible to 72% of handicapped people, it would be a violation of the American Disabilities Act and they needed to appropriate money to install elevators, they did $5.6 billion for just 70 elevators, which works out to a starting budget of $78 million per elevator. This is my main problem with congestion pricing because in reality, I work from home. I don't have to go into Manhattan almost at all for any reason. So if I were to go into Manhattan, I would be perfectly fine with the income that I make, paying that $9 toll, not having to deal with traffic, and basically having all these other people excluded from the roadway. The policy is meant to help people like me, people who work in a profession where I don't have to be in the city, where I don't have to drive all that much in order to get to the city, and if I do want to drive, I can easily afford the toll because I have the privilege of working from home and having a decent income. It's the everyday people, the businesses, those are the ones that are most negatively impacted by the congestion pricing scheme. And this is one of the reasons why you see that all these progressive elites are the people behind this policy. Because make no mistake about it, progressivism is the ideology of the elites. But fundamentally, even with that in mind, the number one reason why I'm against this is because it is meant to be a new revenue stream for the MTA, and they do not deserve new revenue streams. They incinerate your money. They steal it all the time, and you can't keep giving money to this black hole and expect better results when, again, they spend about 6 times the amount of money per mile of track as compared to metros like the one in France. And by the way, the reason I highlight the French one is because they're heavily unionized and they have been one of the more scandal-ridden railways, and yet still it costs 6 times less to build there versus here. And by the way, when I'm criticizing the MTA and how they blow money, how they lose money every year, despite the fact that again, they run a transit system in the city of New York that 85% of the people use in order to get into the city of New York, people will throw comments at me like, well, Sean, it's a public service. It's not meant to actually make a profit. Sean, the mass transit system, it's okay if it loses money because it's a public service. But the fact of the matter is, this is wholly ridiculous. The major train stations that are built in the history of New York were all built by private companies, 3 of which were eventually bought by the city that currently make up the agency known as the MTA. They were profitable before they were bought by the city of New York. In addition to that, the Paris Metro that I talked about, however scandal-ridden that it is, actually makes a profit. The London Metro actually makes a profit. The Tokyo Metro actually makes a profit because it is expected everywhere in the world where you have these transit systems for them to be able to operate based on the fees that they get from riders. So it's an absolute lie that you should be taxing and tolling all these different various areas, that the MTA needs to have its finger in all these different pies, when in reality they should be able to sustain themselves on their own like every other metro is expected to. And by the way, again, the New York City metro system is one of the most elaborate in terms of tunnel length in the world. So yeah, the fact that people repeat constantly that, oh, it's a public service, it's okay if it loses money, honestly enables the theft of all the public money that has been going on in the MTA for decades. And I will emphasize once more that they do not update anything that would make the system more efficient. The signaling system in the subway is 100+ years old. It is the original signaling system that was built by those corporations 100 years ago. The reason the Tokyo Metro, the Korean Metro, the Paris Metro, and the London Metro update their signaling system is because that improves efficiency, and that is something that enables them to make a profit. And by the way, unsurprisingly, many of the metros that I'm describing are privately owned and run, and some of them get government subsidies, make no mistake about that, but the fact is they're expected to operate like market actors, so they operate like market actors. The MTA isn't expected to do that, so they don't update basic things that would improve efficiency in the system, and we end up with disastrous boondoggles and again $80 to $100 million elevators in the system that won't be ready until like 2056. This is not normal. This is not usual. It's absolutely criminal that you're giving them an extra dime, and in addition to that, you're scamming the taxpayers of Queens, New York, who already pay too much money to live in the city of New York just for driving in the zone for 1 minute in order to get on the bridge to leave the zone. It's crazy. It's disgusting. It's an absolute ripoff, but what can you expect from the scammers over in New York? But look, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, you show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media so you can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about yet another scam in the congestion system. Till next time.